Hot Zone Wrap-Up coming up for you on today's podcast. Stay tuned.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hi folks, today we're going to hit a ton of hot zones all over the planet. See, there's so many things going on that you just aren't going to hear much about if you watch the mainstream media in the United States because they're too busy campaigning for the 2020 elections. In the meantime, there's lots of strife and lots of hurting and broken people all around the world. So let's talk about some of them, shall we? First, let's go back to Hong Kong. We talked about them a little bit yesterday, but I think a lot of people are confused as to who are the good guys and who are the bad guys here. And normally, if you're like me, you're going to side with the law enforcement, or at least give them the benefit of the doubt. And I despise it when people vandalize and wreck things and spray paint buildings and all that, wreck things that don't belong to them. In the case of Hong Kong's protests, however, I think we need to remember the following. The reason more than 1 million Hong Kongers have taken to the streets is because of a proposed law that would allow Beijing to extradite Hong Kong residents and foreigners across the border to stand trial in mainland China. Now, those massive demonstrations you're seeing are rightly called a last fight, because if the Chinese Communist Party can extradite whoever they want, those people who offend them, civil rights in Hong Kong are pretty much doomed. Raise your hand if you want to be in that place. Communist China has already victimized tens of millions of people in their 70-year history, and this law would only make that worse. The extradition law represents a direct threat to the rule of law and the autonomy of Hong Kong. Now, they have this one country, two systems framework, and it's being wiped away by Beijing as they put more and more restrictions on speech. There's nothing like a pepper ball in the face to say, stop talking.
Over the course of this protest, this movement, we use this frog in our communication. We sort of mock the government, or we sort of use it as a symbol of the protesters. So today we bring this frog here in our protest.
Now, this proposed law is the last straw for Hong Kongers. The Chinese Communist Party has been locking up protesters, expelling foreign journalists, and arresting independence leaders. And there was that video a few days ago of several hundred people bound and gagged and seated in a square someplace in China. That didn't look good for them. Hong Kong is a city where civil rights and fundamental freedoms have been a model in Asia. And now it's being taken captive by the single-party dictatorship of Xi Jinping. Now the Communist Party wants to finish the job and absorb Hong Kong altogether. The people of that little city are standing up to the bully that is China, and America ought to support them. Beijing still denies that the Tiananmen Square massacre even took place, but the people of Hong Kong know what China's communist regime stands for, and they don't want any part of it. Now, let's go over to Greece, where 12,000 mostly Afghan migrants have been crammed into a camp built for 3,000 for several months. They finally had enough and lit the whole place on fire. Those migrants want to be on their way to Europe to join the several million others who have already made it there. And after this fire on the island of Lesbos, the government of Greece started moving them out of there. So maybe sometimes burning down your own neighborhood does work. But if you have to admit, though, Europe probably has enough vandals already, especially if you've been to Rome anytime lately. All right, let's look over at Yemen now. We talked yesterday about the huge attacks that were carried out by Houthi rebels inside Saudi Arabia, where they killed more than 500 Saudi troops and captured several thousand. Well, the very next day, Houthis released several hundred of those captives, maybe as a gesture of goodwill, but probably more likely it's because they captured a whole lot more than they can feed. In nearby Somalia, there were two major attacks in the past couple of days by Al-Shabaab, that ISIS-affiliated terror group that lives over there. One was a suicide bomb against a convoy of Italian peacekeepers, and the other against a U.S. military base. Yes, we have U.S. military in Somalia, and yes, they're bombing the heck out of Al-Shabaab routinely. So now the terror group struck back, and fortunately the U.S. base is heavily fortified, so nobody got seriously hurt. Over in Indonesia, there were some riots on Monday. The footage of this is really incredible. Protesters clashed with police as thousands of Indonesian students resumed demonstrations against a new law they say has crippled the country's anti-corruption agency. Okay. Well, authorities blocked the streets off leading to the Parliament building in Jakarta, where 560 members of the House of Representatives there, whose terms ended on Monday, held their last session. The clashes between the students and riot police broke out in the evening when police tried to disperse those demonstrators who attempted to reach the Parliament. And let me tell you, it was unbelievable. If you get a chance, you've got to go watch the video of that because it's something else. Protesters set fires to tires and pelted police with rocks and gas bombs and firecrackers. And the riot police shot back with all kinds of stuff, tear gas and water cannons and what looked to me like sparklers. I don't know. Folks, if you ever find yourself in a riot like that, get away as fast as you can. This is one of the most dangerous places you could ever be for several reasons. Number one, the rioters could decide they don't like you. Number two, the police could decide they don't like you and shoot you or think you're a protester. Number three, tear gas isn't fun at all. Number four, the news won't even cover it because they're too busy trying to get you to vote Democrat. So lastly today, I spent all day yesterday working on a CBN news feature about the INCEL movement. Now, if you've been watching the podcast, you remember a few days ago, we did a whole issue on that. But here's a special extended version of the CBN piece that'll help you get a better sense of the rising threat around the world. They call themselves INCELS, or involuntary celibates. Young men depressed by their inability to get a girlfriend. In today's social media culture, many turn to pornography and violent video games to pacify their frustration. So much time online takes them deep into a toxic mix of loneliness and isolation.
The inward focus, it can happen quickly.
Jared Reed spends lots of time counseling young men.
We're not talking about a fun thing to do with somebody physically sitting next to you for a few minutes on a rainy afternoon. We're talking about, weeks poured into an immersive environment.
Easy access to pornography is another major problem.
Of the men I have counseled over the past 5 years, I cannot recall one for whom pornography has not been a struggle.
These twisted images of human intimacy further damage their chances of forming healthy relationships. Internet chat rooms can lead to a dark subculture with deadly consequences. Former FBI agent Mark Lundgren tracks the rise of this phenomenon.
So what we're seeing is sort of a movement that's developing with mostly white, younger men who have sort of descended into a dark place on the internet, sort of an echo chamber, if you will, where what's reverberating in those places is an ideology called incels, or incelibates. They're involuntarily celibate men. They look at people that have normal relationships and the women that refuse to partner with them, and they don't think anything's going to change in the world. They're extremely nihilistic. They feel that society needs to be punished. And we're starting to see this movement rise up much more significantly than we have in the past.
The FBI has identified at least 4 major attacks and 45 deaths attributed to the incel movement. And now they're worried about a movie coming out soon called The Joker that portrays one of these type of people.
You don't listen, do you? You just ask the same questions every week. How's your job? Are you having any negative thoughts? All I have are negative thoughts.
The threat centered around the release of this movie is serious enough that the U.S. military recently cautioned its troops on going to see it.
Some of the incel community have started looking at it as sort of a rally cry because they look at the Joker as a sympathetic symbol in their community.
Kaylin and Austin both struggled with video game and porn addiction.
It was something I struggled with quite a bit. Yeah, that was my life through my 20s, was video games, alcohol, and pornography. Video games definitely makes you more reclusive. Just in its nature, it made me less sociable. With pornography, I'd say looking back, it gave me unbelievably high expectations that no woman would be able to achieve. And so it ruined future relationships with women from that point.
It's all violence. And for me, a lot of those video games, they make you angry. And, you might play for a couple hours and, maybe you don't win and you leave mad, and it just kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day, and you're just kind of mad.
I spent probably about 3 to 4 hours on average online between video games and pornography.
Without a community surrounding us, we can go so deep into the internet, so isolated, so without hope, and so dark, and that, I think, can be absolutely a tool of strategic evil when it's not checked.
That's why these men agree the church has a strategic role to play in helping safeguard our communities.
It is impossible for them to take significant steps of growth in their walk with Christ while addicted to porn. The first big step, right, is when they just open up to someone admitting that there's a problem. However, too many stop there. It's like they confess, they get it off their chest, and then I don't see them for a while. And they come back, a few months later, and they confess again, and then I don't see it. The real change seems to happen when they're ready to get radical about dealing with this sin, putting it to death, to take Colossians 3 language. And that comes in a number of radical choices. The choice to put accountability software, big step of growth. Yes, I'm willing to allow someone to get a log of everything I do on my device in order to be done with a sin. One gentleman, a middle-aged man, had such a struggle. He said, no, I'm too smart. I know ways around the software. And so to this day, I have one of the devices that he used to access pornography in my desk drawer. Men who make the changes, who start to experience victory in this area, it's a wonderful snowball.
I gave my life to Christ. Once I was filled with the Holy Spirit, I couldn't do any of those things anymore. He completely purged me of my pornography addiction, of my alcohol addiction. I completely lost interest in all my video games. I gave them all and sold them all. I trashed all of my pornography, DVDs, magazines. He just completely stripped me of all my addictions when I got saved.
The church has always been the answer. When we reach out in love, and we do what we do best, which is to engage people, meet them right where they are, and then bring them out of the darkness and the loneliness and the lack of hope that they have. That's the best thing that the church can do. But we have to go in with our eyes wide open. Many people in this community are suffering from a mental illness, and so I think the most important thing the church can do is when they recognize somebody is going down that pathway, that they get them some professional help, that they engage the mental health community as soon as possible. They involve law enforcement. But a church is a really good place if we're attentive to the signs of what we see in this community. When we spot it, we can help direct people towards hope.
All right, that's all I've got for today, folks. Thanks for watching the podcast. I really hope you'll like and share it with your friends. Go over to patreon.com/hotzone, and you can subscribe over there and contribute. And when we get somewhere, the next time we go someplace, we run into people in need, we will actually help them directly with your cash, and you'll get to see whose money or whose your money went to help. So I hope you'll go and do that. We have been we've been able to help a lot of people this year. It's been really fantastic, and you've been a part of that. So thank you. So thanks for watching. I'm Chuck Holton. You've been watching The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.